Welcome to the latest episode of the Low Production High Value Show, a show for and about entrepreneurs.
On today's episode, I'll be speaking with small business expert Roger Pierce, author of the new book, The Unsure Entrepreneur, and host of the podcast of the same name. I want to say welcome to Roger Pierce, author of The Unsure Entrepreneur. We're here to talk about his new book. And full transparency, I have been featured in the book. I was honored to have been involved with it just a tiny bit. So I'm glad to have a returning champion, Roger Pierce, here to talk about his book and the entrepreneurial journey. And for those that are listening, I'm holding up a copy of the book. And like I said, for full transparency, I am mentioned in the book a couple times. So thanks, Roger, and welcome to the show. Today, we want to talk about the book and entrepreneurship, which has been one of the foundational tenets of the show since its inception. I want to kick things off with a question about your entrepreneurial journey to date. I didn't realize the quantity was so high. You've launched 14 businesses in your career, and you've trained hundreds of founders and entrepreneurs and people considering the entrepreneurial journey. But what was the catalyst, or what finally made you believe now was the time for a book like this?
Well, it's a good question, and thanks for having me on, Andrew. It's great to be here. I think I love talking about entrepreneurship. That's a given. You know me. I probably don't shut up about it. I've always been a small business guy, a small business trainer. I've had 14 small businesses, and I've had a couple of companies that trained entrepreneurs. One was called Biz Launch, and we trained and coached entrepreneurs across Canada and different parts of the world. In those experiences, working with entrepreneurs and having companies of my own and being in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, I liked having a conversation about getting into entrepreneurship. My career has been a lot focused on, helping people run their businesses or giving them small business advice. But I really love talking about the before part. Should you get into business? What are some of the considerations? What are some of the things maybe you don't know about entrepreneurship? So that was the genesis of the book. And the book really, it's been in the back of my brain, like most of these things are, for a number of years. And it took me a while to kind of say, okay, now's the time to get it all out there and write it all down. It's harder than one thinks. As you know, you're an author. But I really wanted to just prepare people who are thinking about it, what I call the pre-start market or the emerging entrepreneur market, who are on the fence about entrepreneurship. Is it right for them? Are they suitable for it? What do I need to know? What are the pros? What are the cons? What are the hidden risks? And those are some of the things we write about in the book.
But who did you have in mind? Terms like the dreamer, the side hustler, the burned out employee, or someone else? Who did you have in mind? Or maybe, a little bit from column A, a little bit from column B. But
it's so many people come at entrepreneurship from different points of entry. And I think I put it in the preface, the book will appeal to certainly people in career transition. You have a job now, a 9 to 5. Maybe you don't like it. Maybe you hate your boss. Maybe you want to start a business. That's the biggest path into entrepreneurship. The second biggest path is usually youth, young people, right? So you're done college, you're done university. Maybe you've been knocking around for a couple of years and say, you know what? I think I want to start a business. I love working with young entrepreneurs, and that was a big part of my early career, going around and talking to people in colleges and universities about what it takes to get into your own business. Another segment is newcomers to any country, right? Newcomers are great entrepreneurs because they often bring in their own skills. Maybe they ran a business in their own home country. Most likely they ran a business in their own home country, and they're coming into Canada or the US or the UK to set up a business here. So that's a big stream. Another stream is early retirees. So too young to stop working, but old enough to want something different. And they go, you know what? I don't want my job anymore. I'm going to get out of that. But I've always wanted to start this little business. And then the fifth stream is typically unemployed. People who are saying, you know what? I can't find a job. I need money. I'm going to start maybe a small side hustle or a part-time business. Those folks can often be forced into entrepreneurship. And it's an important point to make. Not all entrepreneurship is voluntary. In fact, most of the world's entrepreneurs, especially in developing countries, are kind of forced into it because there's no jobs available. So when I wrote the book, I had a 42-year-old person in mind because that is the average age of a founder in North America right now, 42. The other market I had in mind was young people who definitely need some guidance on this stuff.
Well, are you seeing, it's coincidental that I started Volterra in my early 40s.
There you go. Were you 42?
Either exactly 42 or give or take a year. So, wow. Didn't know it at the time that I was the average.
You're right on target.
But given I'll call it the job market landscape, especially for new grads that are looking at the promise of their future. My father got a job with Bell Canada at 18 and worked his way in and worked his way up for 33 years and retired with a lovely pension. But that promise of that lifetime employment from any corporation now just doesn't exist. And I'm seeing more and more 50 plus people being pushed out through layoffs. And to your point about, the people in this older age bracket saying to themselves, I'm too young to retire, but it'll be 2 years for me to land a job because of the reality of the marketplace. So I'm wondering if it's, the ones early in their career where finding that entry is challenging. And then for the older age bracket, it's the re-entry that's also challenging. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Your father, my father's in the book. I wrote a story about him. Rest in peace, Dad. But he worked for the federal government for 25 years and got early retirement. Very lucky. He took a retirement package when the government was offering that, and he jumped on it. So, I think that's a great reason to get into your own small business, because people might go, I'm too young to just play golf and do all those things retired people supposedly do. I have things I want to contribute. I have ideas I want to implement. I have people I want to meet. And so they make their own small business. It could be a part-time business, it could be a service business. And let me tell you something, people who are in their 50s or 60s make great entrepreneurs because they bring a wealth of experience, obviously, to entrepreneurship. They've been in the job force for so long. They've got connections. That's a huge asset. Your network is your net worth, as you know, Andrew. And they probably have a bit of money behind them. Those are three things.
But a cushion.
Those are good combination. And conversely, switching to young people, those are three things that a lot of young people don't have. They don't have a lot of money. They don't have their network yet because they're just out of school maybe, and they don't have any work experience. So a different set of challenges getting into entrepreneurship, and young people need, of course, different types of supports. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but it's fascinating to me because, to your bigger question about job security, the days are gone when you can graduate from university or college, get offered a nice shiny job and say, all right, we'll take care of you for the next 40 years. Just keep your nose down. We'll give you the gold watch when you're 65 and a nice pension. You and I can't relate to that in our reality. But, that was something like you might see on Mad Men or in the TV shows in the 50s and 60s. It doesn't exist anymore. And what's interesting too is most people, will have a job, but they'll also have a side hustle. Right? So they're kind of part-time entrepreneurs. Given the high cost of living, given job insecurity, people need to bring in some extra bucks. So we're seeing that happen as well. This is what I love about entrepreneurship. There's no one size fits all, or it is one size fits all, because you can really make it your own, depending on your own circumstances.
I have someone who's worked for me in the past. When they were in school, they moved on and taken a full-time position. Well, I happen to know someone who knows them well, and that person's their father. Asked a favor and said, do you have any extra work that you need help with? Because his daughter, who used to work for me, is about to go on mat leave, and they want to sock some here in Canada on maternity leave. You do get paid through it, but it's a smaller percentage than your salary. So they wanted to sock some money away in preparation. So we shall see if I've got some extra work that I can throw her way. But it just, again, to your point about side hustle, and a lot of people have their varying reasons. One is just to explore a passion, test the idea in a safe situation while you still have the grounding of a regular job, or it's out of necessity. And you want to buy a house, in this day and age, if you're Gen Z, it's an uphill battle.
I got to turn the question back around on you. I mean, in the book, chapter 1, if you want to check it out, Andrew shares his story. about getting into your online e-commerce business, right? Selling high-end men's shirts. Did you have a job before that, Andrew, or did you just start the business out of school? What was the story there?
I did have a job which I left. I was naive, but I had some money that I used to fund me, and I was fortunate that I was living at home. So my rent was nominal. I was not married and didn't have children. So my obligations were quite small. Business was full transparency. The business was not successful. It was about, it was 1995. It was 4+ years before Google even arrived. Wow. 20 years before the likes of Shopify made its appearance. It was before PayPal. It was before Stripe or Square. So all the things that we now take for granted, transacting online, Apple Pay, one tap, and like none of that was available to me as a merchant. So all the impediments of shipping stuff across the border was just a paperwork nightmare. However, all of those battle scars led to me working for an e-commerce software company. And so I worked through the .com boom and bust. And it set me on a path into the digital world, which I haven't looked back on. I think it set me up for even better or greater success down the road. So do I regret it? No. Did I take some hard-won lessons from it? Absolutely.
How old were you when you started that business?
30, yeah. So when you turn 30 and your girlfriend at the time is asking you, when are we getting married? And your mother is saying, what are you going to do with your life?
That's interesting.
And you're like, the pressure is on.
You raised a good point there. Just to segue, you so many I call them entrepreneurship enablers, technology. I mean, you are one of the smartest people I know, and your knowledge of all tech is amazing.
Well, thank you. I'm flattered, but I struggle with it like everybody else.
You know so much about. I always turn to you for the latest tool or app or what's happening in AI, and this is what makes entrepreneurship so available today. I mean, you've read the stats. A lot of people are going to be getting into entrepreneurship because of AI, because it's made things even easier. It was already easier with all the apps like Shopify, like you mentioned, so many tools.
Or even outlets like Etsy, where I can turn a craft that I enjoy into something. Yeah. But I taught entrepreneurship and business model design at OCAD University, and many of the students were painters, photographers, industrial designers, and so on. Now, the industrial designers tended to be going in more sort of a consulting path or product design kind of thing, but you would stand in front of this class of these highly creative people and say to them, there will come a time when the things that you do that feed your passion have to be delegated to somebody else and you run the business. Right. Now, if you don't want to grow that big, that's totally fine. But understand that if you do grow that big, there will come a time when you are no longer the designer, no longer the artist, and you are overseeing others who are the designer and the artist and so on. And you can see sort of this, like their eyes get a little wider and the reality of it sort of setting in going, oh, that's a different proposition. And a colleague of mine and I, we'd run workshops for the graduates of the Masters in Design and Strategic Foresight. Again, many of them graduating into consulting. And we would share this, like, what is your number? And then people were like, what do you mean? And I said, well, if you want to make $100,000 a year, and you are self-employed, that means there are a certain number of days of the year that you are selling, and there's a certain number of days of the year that you are delivering. And let's take the weekends out. And so the 365 days becomes whatever, 220. Oh, you want to take 4 weeks vacation? Cut it down. And then we take them through this exercise of the math to their number. And then let's say you're selling 30% of the time and delivering whatever, and you show them the math, and then they realize, oh, then I have to charge this much an hour or this much as a day rate or whatever in order to achieve that. And oftentimes they're not doing the math and underselling themselves. And also, many people are not used to selling.
A big issue. On that note, to help people out, there's a free tool on my website, or a link to a free tool on my website, unsureentrepreneur.com. It's a break-even calculator, right? Like you're just saying, very useful tool to play with those scenarios. How much do I need to charge, especially for service businesses? What's my overhead? And it opens a lot of entrepreneurs' eyes, or new entrepreneurs' eyes, but, oh my God, I really have to sell X to get to Y, you know?
Well, one of the best learned. So when I went to work for Bell, I was talking to a director in HR who had been an MBA classmate of mine. And he talked about, like, when someone has this much salary, on our books, it's this much because of benefits. And so when you realize it's about, so I think it was one example he gave was like a 90K salary was about 135 on their books. And so you realize that's not always visible to yourself as an entrepreneur. So if you don't have your own benefits plan and so on, like you have to realize, oh, so there are some advantages to being a sole proprietor. There's some even more advantages to being incorporated, but there's also a cost for incorporation or stringent accounting and so on. And some of your training that you've done or the guidance you've given entrepreneurs in the past covers some of that. But I wondered if you have other thoughts on that.
Absolutely. You raise a fundamental question or a myth about entrepreneurship. I'll get to do what I love all the time, every day. See, you laugh.
Oh,
you laugh.
Oh, if that were the case.
The best book written about that was The E-Myth, the E-Myth Revisited. You and I know this book well by the godfather himself of small business, Michael Gerber. And in the ebook, he basically says it's the story of someone who runs a bakery shop making pies. And they love making pies and get into this pie baking business and everything's great. And then they realize, I got to hire someone to help me. And then they got to hire someone to, run the store. And before you know it, they're not making any pies anymore. They're doing payroll. They're doing taxes. They're doing paperwork. They're cleaning up the shop. And they go,
but you can't scale unless you can delegate. Yeah. And so, but there's a cost and it's not smooth.
It's not smooth. And the entrepreneur falls out of love with the business because they realize this sucks, right? I don't get to make any more pies. I got to do all this other stuff. So Michael Gerber classifies the three roles of an entrepreneur into three hats: the technician, the manager, and the entrepreneur. And the technician is the person who does the work, takes the photos if it's a photography business, bakes the pies if they're a baker. The manager runs the show, taxes, the paperwork, hiring, the firing, rent, supplies, inventory. And the entrepreneur is the one leading or getting customers or getting the business out there in the media. Those are the three roles. And he kind of advises, pick your lane, pick which role you want to be. If you want to be the technician, great. You're going to have to partner up with the other two categories or hire people to do that, to your point about building systems to scale. So it's a big misconception about entrepreneurship that you get to do what you love all the time. Unfortunately, you don't, unless you set it up right.
Well, but also setting it up right sometimes comes as a result of mistakes, meaning you don't necessarily know how to set it up correctly at the outset. I've had partnerships that I've attempted partnerships in the past, and never say never, but I would be reluctant to join forces with anyone. I have collaborators, but as far as forming a new business entity with partners, can't say as a sign up for that because different risk thresholds, different priorities. So I was once part of a collective and it was like 4 senior people. And I said, okay, let's just for rough, napkin math, back of the napkin math, we all want to make 100K. 10% closing ratio, we need a $4 million funnel. Looking around, I don't see a list of prospects sizable enough that says $4 million. Yep. And I was, I was the one with the most sales experience. And I don't say that as a flex. That was just the reality. I had a sales background where the others didn't. And there was one person who was involved even earlier who said they thought they were going to be the technician, meaning that others were going to sell to keep them occupied. And it was like, oh, so this is the reality. Is like, you all have to collectively agree. One person's going to be the technician, and you can't fault them that they can't sell, don't sell, won't sell, whatever. And that that's your role, and you're going to be, feeding everybody. And some people resent that. And I've seen some other entrepreneurs with partners where they got frustrated, like they felt they were carrying the business. And by circumstance or design, they ended up in that role as the entrepreneur doing the sales and so on. And sometimes you have to have those frank conversations about who's doing what and be able to say to each other, I'm not happy with what you're doing. I'm not happy with, and like Gerber talks about, make a list of what you want to do, make a list of what you don't want to do. And the other party does the same thing. Do it for 6 months and then have a frank conversation about what you want to keep doing and what you don't want to do. And if there's some swapping, or you bring in somebody else to take on. Well, you're better at advice than I am. Those are just lifeless.
You raise a good point about marketing and selling, and I know you've got a strong sales background. I tend to think that I do too, but most people don't, right? And I talk about this in the book. Nothing sells itself. Nothing sells itself. So many entrepreneurs.
But just on that, whether in the book or in past advice to the workshops, like I'll say to people, your passion as an entrepreneur will carry you to a certain point. Just like with selling life insurance, you can sell to friends and family and some people in your network for a little bit, but then you reach the end of that road. And I'm just curious about like what advice do you give for people to bridge that? Okay, you've exhausted friends and family. The reality sets in, you have to sell to strangers.
Funnels, yeah. But the point about nothing sells itself is too many entrepreneurs think the money's just going to roll in, right?
We're that easy.
The service is so brilliant. Oh, the world's going to beat a path to my door.
Isn't it obvious?
And then they spend all this time and money building it, usually without checking out the market first, which is another big mistake, of course. And then they realize, I'm not selling this beyond my friends and family. There's nobody beating a path to my door. Oh my God, I got to get out and do marketing and selling.
And they won't say, I was so wrong.
Right? For people who are maybe not trained or experienced in sales, it's a tough slog, isn't it? It's a very tough slog. You got to get out there and you got to develop your pitch. You got to have your numbers, like you said, 4 million to get down to 1 million or $100,000 salary. It's all a numbers game to a large extent, but it's the discipline of getting out there and promoting constantly. That's what a lot of entrepreneurs aren't prepared for.
Well, I've learned the hard way. I've undersold, but I've also learned. I was on a project with it was a consulting engagement early in the life of Volterra. And I learned that one of the big 5 consultancies that was also involved in the project was a student who was in between 3rd and 4th year of university, billing out at a higher hourly rate than I was. And I was 15 plus years experience and an MBA. And I was like, oh, because I was not being contracted out through the big 5. I was through a boutique consultancy. It's like, oh boy, I'm not charging. And so just by pure serendipity, I got some insight into the reality of how people or how service companies were billing. And an invaluable situation. And also through friends of ours like Louis Trahan from Learngistics and other folks that have come before us on services, they have figured out your hourly rate for billing somebody out from your team should be X because it's got overhead costs built into it. And so there is some industry standards of math out there and so on. And again, you just learn over time. And also I've learned over time is like, okay, let's just try a little high. Let's propose this rate. And if it gets accepted, that's my new precedent. That's my new, I have client validation that I can do that service at that price. And so over the last, my fees have increased dramatically.
I should hope so. And I was on a webinar last week with a guy, Ryan Lozanis, I'll give him a plug, Future Firm, and he coaches and consults accounting firm owners. He's got this really sophisticated program to help accounting firm owners to work less and make more. And the first thing he does, like you're going to guess, is look at pricing and how too many accounting firm owners, and they are small business owners too, charge way too little, give way too much value. It's a stressful, seasonal, and so he says, look, we got to raise your prices. You're going to lose some customers, but the ones you're going to keep or the ones you're going to get are going to make your life much easier. You're going to breathe. You're going to thank me for it. And it works.
It's the 20 rule in, manifest. Well, and for people that read the book or advice that you've given in the past, is there, like we've talked about a number of reasons or catalysts or factors that lead someone to entrepreneurship, but within that, is there a motivation or a mindset that sets people up for long-term success as an entrepreneur?
Yes, there's a chapter on that. The 14 characteristics entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs.
We won't be covering all 14.
But the book is organized into questions. There's do I have what it takes? What's so good about having a job? Why do people get into entrepreneurship? This kind of thing. What are the steps to getting into business? So we're kind of like, self-guiding structure. And I'm going to say, of course, perseverance, consistency, never giving up. That's really important characteristic for successful entrepreneurs. Being able to get over whatever hurdles. I know you've had your fair share. I have too. But it's just, and I think for a true entrepreneur, it gets in your blood, right? It gets in your system. I could never go back and work for anybody else. You could never go back to work for anybody else. We're ruined.
Yeah, I've heard people describe themselves as they're unemployed.
Unemployable, exactly. And it takes one to know one. And once you work in your own business, even if it's mildly successful for a while, you're going to get that bug. You're not going to be able to go back. So be prepared, because entrepreneurship might just ruin you for a job and make you unemployable. So I think that's a big one, Andrew. But the other one too is, of course, support and surrounding yourself with people who can help you. Mentors, advisors, small business counsel, whatever you want to call it. You can't know all the answers. Because as an entrepreneur, as you know, you're thrust into these multiple roles, right? Marketing, HR, accounting, operations. It's frustrating. How do I fix the printer? And you can't do it all. And so having a bunch of people around you who can lean on, whether they're paid or unpaid, that's an important resource. It's having the humility to say, don't know what I'm doing here. I need to reach out for some help. I think that's a real sign of success for an entrepreneur too.
Well, it's interesting. So coincidentally, yesterday, the day before we were recording this, I had a power outage. And so I had no Wi-Fi. And it's first world problems. But if you are running an internet company and you can't do everything off your phone, and yes, you can tether, but again, it's not ideal. Plus you are distracted with, I need to get this problem fixed ASAP. We take for granted, especially in this day and age, connectivity. That's just one example. And so to your point about staying, persevering and so on, I often think, and I've said to people, like, one of the reasons you want to move, if you can, as a service provider, is to move to retainer-based or value-based pricing, is to avoid being scrutinized on an hourly rate, because that can force a race to the bottom, and people lose sight of the value you're delivering and think only about the amount of money they're spending. And if you go to retainer-based, you can eliminate some volatility, because if you're project-based, at the end of every project, technically you're out of business. And if you're not resilient, that can weigh on you, like, oh, where's the next bit of revenue going to come from if you've wrapped up a project? And I have found it's easier to replace a customer than a job. Now, that's my take on it, but it's not everyone's. And so you can have some long nights of dark nights of the soul, as they say, worrying about where's the next client, where's the next project. And so you have to be prepared for that reality.
Terrific subject. My favorite book on that subject is called The Automatic Customer by Toronto author John Warlow. I know John. And he talks about that, how to set up systems, how to set up recurring revenue, subscription-based. I mean, look at all the things we pay monthly for. You've got a retainer-based system. That's brilliant. And that's what entrepreneurs need to learn, because if you're going from project to project, yeah, it's unpredictable and you could starve.
In the beginning, I was project to project. And you sell a project and you're busy delivering.
Where's the next one?
And so you end up trying to balance doing biz dev and delivery at the same time, which you can end up working more hours than you want. A whole variety of things start to play in. Do you think, as folks that are considering entrepreneurship, and just, I'll call it the landscape right now, you've got all these people that are senior talent being displaced. You've got young entrants to the market. Let's talk about the older, more experienced bracket for a moment. I'm seeing them populating a growing segment of the market of fractional resources. And they're not going to grow a business per se of like a bunch of people. They're going to remain self-employed, but they're cobbling together 3 to 5 monthly retainer clients, either to replace the same amount of income they had before in a job, or they end up working a bit more, a bit less, and making more. And I'm just wondering what's your take on that trend?
Absolutely. Cobbling together, like you said, 3 or 4 gigs. Oh, that's a business, right? That's a business. And that is certainly what's happening. I love the term fractional. We are seeing you and I know a lot of people in this space, fractional HR, fractional CFOs, fractional marketers. It seems to be the buzzword these days. And that's great, because it usually infers for the entrepreneur reasonable compensation, maybe higher end pay. Maybe you can charge $250 or $300 an hour per se. I don't recommend charging by the hour. Like you said, make it into a project-based fee or a retainer. But there are a lot of people doing that and hobbling together 3 or 4 contracts to make a viable business. I think that's fantastic. What I love, Andrew, is the trick of, and I've seen so many people do this, they leave their corporate job, or maybe they get downsized, and then they sell their services back to that same company, usually as a much higher paid consultant. That's the first place I recommend. I go, it's funny how the company is going to do that math, but they're actually going to want to hire you back as a consultant, probably more than as an employee, because it's more flexible for the company, the different tax write-offs. It happens a lot, doesn't it?
Well, they feel like, oh, we're just going to date. We don't have to be married anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, when I got hired into Bell, there was the person in HR who gave my screening interview was 47, had worked at Bell since she was a teenager in high school, which was something you could do then. And so at 47 had reached her number for retirement. The year before had an executive MBA paid for her by the company. So she had an MBA now too. Was offered a package. She took it. And then was hired back as a contractor. And so she was just laughing.
Wow.
But to your point, if you can create that scenario for yourself, if you're considering entrepreneurship, that's a great transition. One, it's familiar territory. Two, it's a nice, smooth transition. There's less disruption in your income and so on. Yeah, if you can make it happen, do it. You might be surprised. But kind of to pick up on that too, we've talked about the financial risk and moving away from hourly to retainer or to a project or value-based pricing, again, to just remove the scrutiny and financial pressures. But there's also the emotional risk, and we talked about the long dark night of the soul moments and things like that. But you talk about that the emotional risk is often underestimated or overlooked. But I don't want us to overlook it here. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Entrepreneurs have a higher suicide rate than any other profession. True fact.
Wow.
So everyone talks about dentists, et cetera. It's entrepreneurs because there's so much on the line. Right. I mean, people put their house up as collateral. They quit their job. They put their life savings in. They borrow money from their friends or family. I mean, it's bad enough if you owe a couple $100,000 to the bank, but imagine doing that and borrowing money from Aunt Sally or Uncle Ken and losing it, right? And not having that money to pay them back. That's huge risk and huge, like you're saying, emotional impact. And it's an often overlooked, it's a big overlooked risk area for entrepreneurs. Do I have the supports in place to handle the emotional side of entrepreneurship? What happens to my relationships? If my business doesn't work, am I going to have troubles with my family? Am I going to have troubles with my significant other, my life partner? Do I have the type of personality that can roll with the punches? Because it's a roller coaster. Can I handle the lows? You can handle the highs, probably, but can I handle the lows? These are some of the really important aspects that are overlooked. Because like on shows like Shark's Tank and Dragon's Den, and I love watching them, all they talk about is the numbers and how much for 10% of the company and what are your sales. There's a whole other part of entrepreneurship. It's the emotional part of it. And you got to make sure you're ready for that.
We'll be back in a moment. And now, a word from our sponsor. Social media has become an imperative for almost every business. Discover how to successfully implement an effective social media strategy that is supported and integrated throughout every part of your organization. With this essential book from our host, Andrew Jenkins, Social Media Marketing for Business, Scaling an Integrated Social Media Strategy Across Your Organization, is now available from Amazon or KoganPage.com. Now, back to the show.
Well, and I agree. Like one email, one Slack message, one text message on the weekend or at night can just throw you. And it's not just the effects on you, as you said, the effects on others around you. And they didn't necessarily sign up for what you end up putting them through. And the other thing is, often if you are stressed and feeling sort of under pressure, and in sports, they call it having the yips, where you're not performing, like you're screwing up. You can have the yips as an entrepreneur where you get into this rut feeling of like, where's the next client? Where's the next whatever? And then you start to second guess yourself, and you start to feel that the prospective clients can see that too, that you seem off your game, that you seem desperate. And that may all be things in your head, but it's still an emotional thing that you may not have thought about.
Yeah, and then you're in a kind of a death spiral, because as soon as you lose that self-confidence, like you're saying, in front of the client, that's a death beetle. That's a virus that creeps into your system, and then, yeah, you start to become, depressed about it, and you don't perform well, and you come across as desperate, and then things start to spiral even.
But even that is a risk there's still, it's also a reality. But that, I mean, you talk about this idea of worst case scenario thinking, and that it's kind of like, if you need to be prepared for some dark days, some challenging days, some days where you will feel like that you're not, that you're just not bringing your best self to the task at hand or whatever. Talk to us a little bit about that worst case scenario.
You're touching upon entrepreneur isolationism, which happens to the best of us, especially if you're working alone. In a job, you've got this sort of community of people, right? Maybe you work at a big company and you're water cooling it and having drinks after work, and there's people in the next cubicle. And as a solo entrepreneur, it's almost jarring. It's just me here. Not only do I have all these new responsibilities, marketing and HR, but I'm alone. Right? I'm alone. And if you don't take care of that, if you don't take care of you, it's going to become a problem. So what can you do? Thankfully, like I'm saying, this is the era of the entrepreneur. There's an ecosystem out there for you to tap into. There are small business groups. Just go on meetup.com, Google small business groups near me. You and I were part of a BNI group, Business Networking International, that had a lot of social aspect to it. You could talk to other entrepreneurs and business owners and share ideas. But more importantly, we lifted each other up, I found, going to those groups. And that is so important, especially for a new entrepreneur who's finding themselves kind of isolated in this whole role. Make sure you're connected. Go out for coffee with someone. Join a networking group. You'll realize you are not alone. There are people who can relate to what you're going through.
I've said to people, like, when a client is late paying, the client doesn't feel the impact, especially if they're part of a larger organization where it's like they approve the invoice and then it's just taking whatever time it takes to be processed internally. But when you're the entrepreneur and you don't receive that payment, that feels entirely different. And if you have people that you have to pay, other vendors, employees, or whatever, that's a pressure that oftentimes clients don't experience. And so there's a disconnect. And what I mean by that is, like, when you talk to another entrepreneur who's gone through the same thing, that's where you don't feel so isolated. You're talking to someone else who's understands what you're going through, and that's just one example. And yeah, it's not for the faint of heart.
You're not alone, for sure. Get out there and connect with other entrepreneurs. That's why it's such a great time to be one. There's so much support out there for us.
All those challenges, all those experiences, good, bad, or indifferent, what do you think is the most surprising to entrepreneurs? It could be something good that surprises them, could be some challenges that they are unexpected to them. Like, what are some surprises that entrepreneurs have shared with you?
I'll use the good and the bad, because that's the premise of the book, kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly of entrepreneurship. A bad part of entrepreneurship is cash flow unpredictability. You touched upon that earlier. Not knowing where the next paycheck is coming in. Maybe you've exhausted your lines of credit and your cash reserve, et cetera. And it's like, oh my God, or a big client tanks on you, or there's a recession, or God forbid, there's COVID, a little thing called a pandemic. That stress.
Black swan event.
It's the unpredictability. And this is one of the things I talk about for, are you suitable to be an entrepreneur? Because if you can't handle that, if that's not in your wheelhouse to kind of tolerate, and you don't like knowing where the next paycheck is coming from, or not knowing where the next paycheck is coming from, that's a sign maybe entrepreneurship isn't for you, and maybe a job is a more predictable path, right? There are people, nothing wrong with that, who want that every 2-week payment cadence. Now, you've recreated it in your own business, but it took you a while to get there probably. So that's a real downfall warning sign for a lot of entrepreneurs right there. And the good part, though, the surprising part of entrepreneurship is the joy, Andrew. I think that I hope people experience if they choose to get into this world. I wake up in the morning, I can't wait to get to work. Right? You probably most days feel the same way. I love what I do. He laughs. I love what I do.
I laugh because I'm not a morning person. I feel more. Well, I feel more joy later in the day.
Whenever you get to work, but you are experiencing joy, and it's hard to describe to people who aren't working for themselves. It's just like, oh my God, am I getting paid for this? I get to do this all the time. I love it. It's that joy of being able to do what you want, the freedom, the control, the opportunities.
Well, and when I hear from a client that some gratitude for the work that we've done, or they refer us as a stamp of approval, or they give us like a glowing review, you can't quantify that. Like, it's fantastic. And again, to me, that's a surprising thing for me. Like, I hadn't really thought about that per se. The one thing I wanted to highlight, like revenue and so on, is like, there are times that I'm making less than people that work for me.
Sure.
But when you are incorporated, in some ways, that's what you want, meaning that you're keeping more money in the business. You have to keep more money in the business to grow it, like investing back in the business. And that, I think some people need to realize too, is that it's not, does it offer flexibility? Yes. Does it offer the opportunity to make more money? Yes. But there's also some advantages of being incorporated where the business can buy certain things legally and legitimately. Let me preface that. But there's also the reality of that if you want to surround yourself with people, that you as the founder are going to have to make some sacrifices that you may not have planned or expected.
Totally. Lots of sacrifices. And you touched upon, business structures there, corporation. Most entrepreneurs start off as a sole proprietor, which means legally and accounting wise, you're just the same entity. And then you graduate into a corporation. I recommend usually around $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 in revenue. It's time to set up a basic state or provincial corporation. There are tax advantages. But doing the math, like you said, of how much you make per hour is depressing at times. Oh my God.
Ooh,
Why
I was cheap that month.
But you gotta put it in perspective that, okay, if that happens for like a number of years, we got a problem here, right? Maybe you should quit the business and go back to a job. I hate to say it. If you're not making as much as you would in a comparable position, there might be
well, that's what a lot of startup founders do. They work like a dog for 3-5 years, sell the business, whatever. And then you're like, okay, you made $3 million when you sold it.
Yep.
Whatever. Just a rough number. You kind of go, when you work that back over those 5 years, if you'd stayed in a job.
Math. And you raise a good point. What is the goal? I know it's counterintuitive. And again, John Warlow talks about this in his book, a second book, Built to Sell. He says, the day you start your business, think about how you're going to end it. What is the exit strategy? What is the exit strategy? Are you going to sell it to your family or pass it to your family? That's one strategy. That's succession planning. Are you going to cash in and sell it to a buyer, which happens all the time in the news? Chapter 1 in my book, Dave Sinkinson, he sold his business for $40 million, built it up. App Armor, built it up and sold it for $40 million. Young guy. So, or are you going to keep the business and delegate it? That can happen too, right? You just put a manager in place and you live off the monthly paycheck. I know entrepreneurs doing that as well. So starting with the end in mind is hard to think about because you're so wrapped up in getting the business going, but it's really important.
Well, that also translates into even if you're not going to sell the business, having the frame of mind of making it saleable. Right. What I mean by that is that you, as they often say, that you have to make the business, grow the business in such a way as that it can run without you to make it saleable. Because if it can't run without you, that's an impediment to selling it.
The best example is, of course, McDonald's, right? Known for its systems. The operation manual is not just a binder. It's like a filing cabinet of all their systems because every little aspect of a franchise is worked out and they make money, right? And that's why it's so valuable.
Well, but that ties back to what you were saying earlier about AI. And that, the talk of a one-person billion-dollar company. I don't know yet. Maybe for 3 years from now, 5 years from now. Is it outside the realm of possibility? No, it's not outside. The signals are there that such a thing could be possible.
Could be you.
We'll see.
Let's hope.
I'm still reluctant to automate to such a degree that I would trust it. Because every time I was working on something with AI yesterday, I won't say it was hallucinating, but it was promising something it couldn't deliver.
So what would you say to entrepreneurs, Andrew, who are a little AI reluctant or emerging entrepreneurs?
I think you absolutely have no choice but to become AI literate. That doesn't mean that you have to use it in your business, but you need to become aware of its implications on your industry sector, on the clients you're trying to serve, because either you'll become a competitor to another person who's incorporating AI. You're going to be having to deal with AI being used internally with your clients. You're going to have to articulate what you are and aren't doing with AI in your own work. So we are asked quite regularly, do you use AI? And I say, absolutely. However, we use it for brainstorming and we use it for analytics. We do use it for writing, but we don't allow it to author anything original. We use it for research for our writing, for blogs and things like that, but we do not hand over full control. I'm fine for automation, but autopilot, don't trust. Our clients entrust us to protect their brand in the social media sphere. And so if we relinquish total control to autopilot, that's putting their brands at risk that they've entrusted to us, and we won't do it. And we do a lot of work in financial services. and where, like many other sectors, but financial services, and their issues about compliance and regulatory requirements, so on, it's of the utmost importance for brand protection. So we tread cautiously. But I use AI every day, but I have compartmentalized it.
I think you gave the best line I heard about it, about AI. You said, don't worry about AI replacing you, use it to assist you.
Mm-hmm.
Does it still stand?
Absolutely. Second brain, people are designing, they're calling it their chief of staff. So yesterday I was using AI to conduct personal brand audits on 3 executives from one of our clients and 3 executives from competing companies to assess what the senior leaders from our client need to do from a personal brand point of view, greater visibility for themselves and a halo effect for the company itself. But the hours and days it would take for me to construct that myself versus within an hour, I can initiate the agents to do it, compile the data, and put it into a PowerPoint. I can do it in an hour.
Like that. Love it.
And that's not part of the scope of our project or our engagement. This is value add, and this is potentially to serve us having an expanded remit with our client, because we support the company. We don't support the executives, but we've been making a case for these executives need to be more visible. They need to be more active. Oh, by the way, we can help. But this is where, like, to your point, is like, when you're saying, should people be thinking about AI, again, as your assistant, as your chief of staff, as a supporting virtual employee, think about how you can differentiate yourself with more value-added services. It aids your scalability. You can actually venture into some other peripheral service lines that you couldn't have done before AI.
Fantastic. You are my go-to source for all things AI.
Well, I'm not a guru. I'm a learned practitioner. I'm part of a number of groups of other users, and we just sort of like hive brain or hive mind, or however you want to describe it. So I just get together a group of people 2 different times of the week, and we talk about what we're playing with, what we're doing, what we've explored, where we've found roadblocks, where we found successes. And so it's just a collective learning.
That's great. These are other entrepreneurs you're sharing ideas with?
Yeah.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. That's part of entrepreneurship. I love it.
Well, this is where, again, some of the workshops we've held in the past, finding these communities of entrepreneurs, practitioners, like my father, when he retired from Bell, I mean, they were of an era where computers weren't their thing. They were coming in towards the end. Well, all these retirees would get together at the computer club to learn the latest for using a computer and the internet. And again, they would all share what they're doing, what they played with, what they've learned. And he loved it and his computer skills, because it was a different era for them, for that generation. So finding a community where you can just say, I don't know what I don't know. And I'll tell you what I know about these things. You tell me what you know about those things, and we leave better off. Anyway, this isn't about me. I want to talk about, before we wrap things up, we've talked a lot about the mindset, the considerations people are having about entrepreneurship, about getting into entrepreneurship. But I would be remiss if we didn't talk about maybe entrepreneurship isn't for you. And what are the signs that would suggest to someone maybe it isn't for you? What are the red flags?
There are red flags. And the book is quite transparent. It's not a sales job on entrepreneurship. Although at the end of the day, I do want people to explore entrepreneurship. I'm transparent about that, but I want you to go into it fully informed. The red flags are, is this the right time for you? There's a readiness aspect. If someone is in a personal life crisis of some sort, maybe has no money, has no savings, has no access to credit, those are red flags. If they are overly convinced of their idea and they haven't done their market research to test it out, to ask customers, will you buy this widget or this service? That's a red flag. Anyone talks to me about, I know this will sell, that's a red flag. If there's no support from the life partner, or a lot of skepticism from the life partner, the wife or the husband or the boyfriend or girlfriend, that can wear one down too, because you need that ecosystem, as we talked about, for emotional well-being and emotional support. And if someone comes to me, Andrew, and says, no one else has done this before. No one else has done in the history of the world.
Oh, they have.
Has done this before. That's a red flag, because it's kind of like, they probably have somewhere, you just don't know about it. And why aren't there more competitors? Competition is actually a good thing, a healthy thing, right?
Well, that also speaks to the burden that will be on you to educate the market.
Yeah, the simplest example is
you don't get paid to educate.
No, and that's the domain of big companies. Like Apple can spend money educating me on the latest technology and its benefits to me. Maybe it's robots making soup or whatever. So they have the pocketbook to do that. A small business owner doesn't. Right? So you got to go for a product or a service that's kind of a variation on what's out there. Think about pizzas. No one has to tell me what a pizza is or the benefits of a pizza. I love pizza. Look at my stomach. All you have to do is come up with a better tasting pie, right? Or maybe a better marketing campaign like Pizza Pizza that's famous 30 minutes are free. You just got to come up with a variation. So I love those types of businesses that it's like the idea is established, there's a market out there, and I'm just going to do it a little bit differently.
Well, speaking of pizza, we were dealing with a frozen pizza company that sold pizzas on a subscription where for $50 a month, you would get a box of flash frozen artisan pizza. And to your point, everybody knows what a pizza is. But what do you need to tell your prospective customer about your pizza that could justify being twice as expensive as a frozen pizza in the supermarket?
Challenge. Interesting.
And so, yes, it was a challenge for them, but they had come from a restaurant with wood oven pizzas. And so they transported the story from the experience you had in their restaurant to you can get that restaurant experience at home. And it was like, 15 minutes from frozen to your plate. But to continue on sort of that framing, what's an honest question? Like you talked about the red flags, but what's a question someone should be asking themselves, either to raise those red flags for themselves or to find out if there are any red flags, or just, what's the question they should ask them before they get too far down an entrepreneurial?
Am I ready for this? It's the $1 million question. That's a very broad question, I know, but are all the factors in place we talk about in the book? Have you got the funding? Have you got the research done? Have you got the support? Is it a proven idea, et cetera, et cetera? Am I ready for this? Because it's going to take all of your time, 60, 70, 80 hours a week. It's going to take almost all of your money. It's going to take a lot of your sanity, as I talk about too in the book. So am I ready for this, right? Or am I the type of person who just wants to work 9 to 5 and that's fine and have that paycheck and maybe I won't get rich, but I'll retire, So am I ready for this is a good question to ask.
As we draw things to a close, if someone reads your book and decides for themselves that maybe entrepreneurship, and they ask those, am I ready questions, or they identify some red flags for themselves and they decide, now is not the time, or maybe it will never be the time. Do you see that as a success?
For sure. My job is to maybe scare some people away from entrepreneurship. Well, that makes me sad at the end of the day, because of course I believe the world needs more entrepreneurs and we all benefit with more innovation and creation. End of the day, it's not for everybody. And if all things considered, you read the book and you decide, because it is kind of a decision guide. I'm glad I spent the $20 or $25 reading this book, because I'm not meant to be an entrepreneur. I'm not ready to be an entrepreneur. Then maybe I've done them a huge service, right? By preventing them going down this rabbit hole. Or maybe, Andrew, they just say, not yet. Or they say, you know what? I'm just at a school. I got $100,000 in student debt. I'm getting married in a month. Maybe now's not the right time to start. And they put it off for 5 years.
Yeah, there's a few red flags.
So yeah, for sure. If I talk a few people out of entrepreneurship, then that's okay too, because it's not for everybody.
Well, and let's turn this back on you. What do you wish? I mean, there wasn't an Unsure Entrepreneur book when you got started. What do you wish you had known then, or someone told you, or something you found in a book then that you didn't know then but wish you knew?
Well, I think I went to business school. I took marketing and sales. I should know more about what I'm doing getting into business, but it's overwhelming how much stuff you got to look at, especially back in my youth when things were more analog. I was sending faxes, Andrew, back in the day. Things were much more user-based. So I think being prepared for all the multitasks you have to do, finance and the marketing and the selling, nobody really prepared me for that, because a job is very compartmentalized, right? You might have a very specific role. And there's Bob down the hall who can fix the printer for you, and Mary will help you with your paycheck down at the other office. As an entrepreneur, you're doing that all yourself, and it can be overwhelming. So I wish I was better prepared for that way back when.
Well, and I think just to tie AI into it for just a second, I think this is where both you and I, in some ways, would wish we had access to AI in the beginning, because I can now do market research. I can now, and I recently did this, had AI do research to see whether my pricing was market competitive.
Oh, wow.
You can now ask AI to ask you questions about your business idea, like scrutinize this like no other.
Yeah, yeah.
And like you can sort of field test your business idea using AI and all the information it has access to before you spend a dime.
Did AI tell you to give yourself a raise?
It no, as it confirmed that I was right. Give or take 10-15%. Different tiers, I was on the money. Some had to be adjusted. Nothing shattering. I was on the mark. And plus, you can use different AI tools to do the same thing, sort of like to make sure you're not getting the bias of one. But anyway, just like the fact that as someone considering entrepreneurship, before you take any risky step, there's so much that can be learned and compiled, that you can actually take that first step with a lot more certainty than you or I ever had the opportunity to back in the beginning.
Used as a research tool. I forgot. You reminded me. I asked AI to price out comparable business books so I could figure out the right price for myself. It's an excellent research tool. Excellent.
And so, as you did to me, so what you had in mind for a price, how close were you after to the result?
Told me to lower the price a little bit in the U.S., to be honest. And that's
Okay.
what I've done, and the ebook too. And so we'll see if it's right.
But still valuable
Yeah,
feedback, right?
yeah. I mean, just the instantness of it all, right? The amount of data. Now you got to check it, like you said. You can't always take it to market, but you got to check it and use different sources. That's a good idea you just had. But yeah, it's just so powerful. You can't be.
Well, a lot of times I just end it with, please double check your numbers and the underlying logic, and it'll, because sometimes it does hallucinate. Sometimes, I'm sorry to say, it lies.
Yeah, I get it.
Well, I have to thank you again. This was fun, and I'm so happy for you about the release of the book. And I thank you again for involving me in it, not just for my ego, but similar to you. I like talking about entrepreneurship. I like talking to entrepreneurs, and I hope people find value in the book as they consider their entrepreneurial journey.
Andrew, here's my chance to thank you for being a part of the book. You were, not only did you contribute great content, you're in chapter 1, I think you're in one of the last chapters too, talking about social media and how to get your business off the ground. But you were very instrumental in guiding me because you had so much experience writing your own book. And I thank you for that. You were instrumental to the process. So thank you.
I'll be in every chapter in the next one, I hope.
Can I give a plug about where to get the book?
Yes, please do.
Simple enough. unsureentrepreneur.com is the website. You'll find the book for sale there.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Low Production High Value Show. Be sure to give us a rating and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Don't forget to check out Volterra at volterradigital.com to learn more about how they can support your social media marketing.